I'm with Matthew Goldman, who is SVP Technology for TV Compression at Ericsson. Hello, Matthew.
Hi.
Now, immersive TV, I mean, first of all, tell us what it is, briefly, because I know it's a big subject, and tell us what, or how important that will be for consumers as we move ahead.
Right. So immersive television is really about making television that we're viewing a much more realistic experience. And there are several factors that make that up. But very common today, you've heard of the new 4K televisions. So that's really speaking about the spatial resolution being 4 times that of HD. But there are other areas and factors that are equally as important, such as immersive audio, which is multi-channel audio, something like 22.2, and maybe object-based audio in that. And then there are also high frame rates, which is particularly for sporting material or for nature films where you want a very sharp image of what you're looking at, but the frame rate needs to be high, otherwise you get motion artifacts such as motion strobing if you don't do that. But probably the area that's most of interest right now is high dynamic range, which is basically increasing the contrast of the image to look much more realistic like it is outside, a wider color gamut, which is more truer colors. And to represent those, since we're talking about digital television, we need deeper sample precision, because right now everything is captured as 8-bit samples. 2 to the 8 is 256, which means the levels of different things you can represent is very restricted. And it will go to a higher sample precision to be able to represent that high dynamic range and wider color gamut easier. So in fact, those last 3 that I mentioned really can be considered being working together as one new immersive viewing experience. So for shorthand purposes, we'll just call that HDR+. When I refer to HDR, WCG, and 10-bit sample depth, in other words, so high dynamic range, wide color gamut, and higher sample precision.
Okay, and what difference will it make for consumers? I mean, how important will it be?
That's really what's amazing about it is you have to sit at the right viewing distance because of the human visual system's acuity in order to see the higher spatial resolution. So if you're not sitting close enough to the display, you might not actually see the 4K over the HD. The amazing thing about HDR+ is it's not impacted by viewing distance. So it probably is going to turn out to be the most significant change in the television viewing experience since going from black and white to color. It is really hard to explain what it is, but when you see it, you know it. And what it is the picture just pops. In other words, because the contrast level is so much deeper, it looks like you're looking at something real versus something that's surrealistic on a display. The colors look more realistic, but mostly it's about the levels of brightness, or the difference between how white the whites are versus how deep the blacks are, and that separation. And because it really looks much more natural, you don't realize it, because in the human visual system, resolution is not just a function of how many pixels it is. It's also a function of contrast. So you recognize sharpness as additional resolution. So what does this all mean? It means the pictures look more real. So it will look like you're actually at a stadium watching a game when things in the bright areas can be seen while looking in the shadows, where today, if you look at television, one is washed out. So if you're looking at a goal being kicked or something, or being thrown, and it goes from a dark area to a bright area, the camera might not be able to capture it today in production, but you can see it when you're at the stadium. Or if you're looking at a tiger running along a plane, the same type of thing is you want to see the highlights of that. I guess a good way of explaining it would be if you're at the beach or you're fishing on a river and the sunlight is reflecting off the water, you feel the intensity of the light. It's not just about seeing it, you can feel the intensity of light. Or how about this, you're walking through a parking lot and it's a bright sunny day, and the sunlight, the specular light of the sun is reflecting off the metal of the car. And so when you look at it on TV today, it just looks like a light spot. When you see it with these HDR+, you're going to feel that distance. So it's going to feel much more real to you, and that's what consumers are going to notice. And if you're going to make a change in the television system, it's really about a noticeable difference. And that's what makes HDR+ so exciting.
Okay, we're talking about changes to the television system. I mean, if we want to make immersive TV or HDR+, realistic or real right throughout the value chain for delivery, what do we need to focus on right now as an industry?
So the ecosystem is going to have to change to support all this. And we already know with the spatial resolution of 4K, in the uncompressed domain, that's 4 times as many bits. Now, For HDR Plus, it's not so bad. I mean, we are going to do 10-bit versus 8-bit, so that adds a little bit more, 20% more in the bit area. But in the compressed domain, actually having more accurate representation of the image means when you're predicting what the next picture will look like, you'll get a better match. So you're trading off more bits in the encoding of it for having a better match, which means fewer bits, because the way compression works is you only record the difference. So that's a wash. Having more colors, you're still only representing the numbers, so that adds no more bits anyways. The high dynamic range portion of it, you will add some bits, and depending on the system that's being used, there are several that are proposed today. There's no decision has been made yet which way of doing the transforms, or the transfer functions for that. And what's really great about that is it could be 0. Because you get a better match, or it could be 20% or something in the area. But it's not like spatial resolution would be 4 times as many bits. So that's in the uncompressed domain. When you compress it, maybe 2.5 times as many. But the key thing is everything along the entire production chain, everything along the delivery chain is going to need to change to support this. So we have to focus on that in an end-to-end ecosystem. Some things are easier than others. Some things have already been addressed. Other things, we still have a little bit of ways to go. Probably the biggest thing that needs to work on right now is deciding, and this gets a little bit technical here, but to do high dynamic range, there's a function when you record something from a camera, which is in the real world, onto a digital bit stream. And that is known as optoelectrical transfer function, or OETF. And that is from the optical space to the electrical space, to bits, And then you have the inverse function of that, which is what gets done on a display, which is now the EOTF, or electro-optical transfer function. There are many different ways of doing that. Each one of the ones that are being proposed right now have certain advantages, and they also have certain disadvantages. So the industry's in the midst of that to decide which way it is. Because the whole point of having standards is to have interoperability, so you don't want to have multiple different ways of doing it. And of course, with engineers, as you probably know, if you put 2 engineers in the room, there's going to be 3 opinions of the way it has to be done, right? So this is the same thing. It's not that one is better than the other. They're different, and each has their mechanism. We have to solve that first. And then there are other issues. Now, how do you represent that in the compressed domain? So there actually is a work item that's happening now in the joint video team between MPEG and VKEG, which is the Moving Picture Experts Group and the Video Coding Experts Group, which are well-known standards bodies that brought us all the standards from MPEG 2 video to Advanced Video Coding, AVC, and now the brand new standard, when I say brand new, it's been out for a year or two, known as HEVC, or High Efficiency Video Coding. This group has now gotten together to say, how can we more efficiently encode HDR+. And they're working on that right now. They have it in a fast track, and they're hoping that's going to be done by October of 2016. So we also need to work on the interfaces as well, and we have the different standards bodies. There's over a dozen of them working on this. And we're all shooting to have all this done by the end of 2016 so that implementations in 2017 and 2018 can take advantage of these new features. And the first set will probably be what we have today for UHD, for 4K UHD, which is known as UHD1. It's just being 4 times the spatial resolution. That's phase 1, which is 2014, 2015. That's what all the televisions do now. And even though there's going to be an evolution every year in consumer electronic devices, we're trying to make it so that there's a service that can be launched in the 2017, 2018 timeframe. We're going to call it phase 2 just for the purpose of this conversation. That's still to be decided what the name is, but we have phase 1, phase 2. And the reason why we're trying to pick a date on that, even though there's a continual evolution, is so that we can build systems that are interoperable. And that's what's really important is Ericsson in particular, but also a lot of the companies that are participating in these standards, we believe in the open standards process to foster interoperability and to grow the industry.
Okay, and you've talked about HDR plus, obviously, and HDR is one element of that. I mean, just for anyone who doesn't know what high dynamic range is, just explain that in sort of simple terms and the role that plays within this.
Right, so the HDR and HDR plus is high dynamic range. And what high dynamic range is, in the simplest way, is truly what contrast means. But most people don't even understand what contrast means. So it's the difference between the deepest blacks on a display and the brightest whites. It's that difference. That's what makes it a high dynamic range. So what happens today with television, the television system is designed today, it had great limitations because Up until about 15 years ago, we all had cathode ray tubes. For television for over 50 years were tubes. So the standard of production for television was around what the capabilities of a cathode ray tube was. And it turned out that the level of dynamic range you can do for that was from the low level, of course, 0, which would be the darkest, right, up to about 100 candelas per square meter, which was the luminance intensity. Well, it gets tiring of saying candelas per square meters, so the shorthand for that is known as a nit, N-I-T. So all production stuff was done at 100 nits because that was CRTs. Well, we now have flat panel displays on several different technologies, but most of the common one today is probably an LED lit LCD display, which inherently has 300 to 400 nits native capability in it. Now, why does it matter how bright it is versus how dark it is? Because you just don't want to turn the brightness up, because that'll make everything too bright. And actually, we'll lift the black level up and the black start to become gray. What you want to do is the things that really are brighter, you want to make brighter. It's a very narrow focus of brightness while keeping the rest of it, the light levels low or dark, because that's what it looks like in real world. And that is what dynamic range is. And the edges will look sharper, they'll look more real. We adjust the things that we see. So television looks perfectly normal to us in the way it is now with this very limited, which we'll call standard dynamic range, SDR, very limited range that things are produced in now. You don't realize how it's not normal until you see something that's high dynamic range next to it. Here's an example. If you were in a field, and in the field were flowers, and it was a bright sunny day, those flowers would be absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. The sunlight would be reflecting on them, the colors would be rich and real, right? If you look at that on a TV, it will look totally normal to you. Now, you can't do this description I'm describing here, because if you put a television out into a bright sunny day, you won't be able to see the picture on it because it's too bright. But let's just pretend for the purpose of this that you could do that. If you had a camera out there on a flower, focused on it in the field, and you could see the flower at the same time, it would not look real to you at all, okay? Because it would look very flat, because there's no difference between the brightest areas of the pictures and the darkest. Another good example of this would be if you're have a camera focused on the edge of a garage. The garage door is open and you have all these articles of things in the garage, your golf clubs, your car, all the knickknacks and miscellaneous stuff on the shelf. And outside you have other objects. With today's television, you only see, a choice would be, you see the details inside the garage, but everything outside would be completely washed out in white. Or you see what's outside the garage, and what's inside the garage could be all black, all shadows. With high dynamic range, you'll be able to see both, just like the human eye can see. So it's that realism that you don't realize is missing today. That's why I said it's really hard to describe it, but when you see it, you know it. And it's right away. That's why we describe it as being the most significant difference between with television, between seeing color versus black and white. Again, how do you describe color to someone that only has black and white, right? But when you see color, you're like, wow. But it's important to note, this isn't oversaturated, almost comic strip color, which is what happens if you crank up the color and the brightness and the set. These look real and natural, full range. And that's why this is such an important feature. Yeah,
it does look fantastic. I've seen your demos and really big difference. Now, you're a founding member of the Ultra HD Forum, so just tell us what Ericsson wants to achieve through that organisation.
Right, so Ericsson, as I mentioned earlier, is a believer in open standards, and we participate in dozens of standards development organizations, or SDOs, all over the place that do different things and different elements different elements of wireless technology for Ericsson, or in our case of the group that I'm in, broadcast television, or just television in general technology. But each one of those SDOs is usually concentrated on one area. For instance, the Society of Motion Pictures and Television Engineers, SMPTE, worries about the production end of it. You have regional groups that for direct-to-home or direct-to-consumer, such as the Digital Video Broadcasting Project, that deals with direct-to-home aspects of it. And then there's the Consumer Electronic Association that deals with consumer devices. No one's looking at the whole end-to-end production chain or workflow. That's where the Ultra HD forum comes into play. It is a forum of people to share ideas. It is not an SDO. We're not developing standards. What we're hoping is to influence some commonality in terminology, so we know what we're talking about the same thing, as well as the needs or some commercial requirements, some consistencies across these. So you're basically doing like a gap analysis, what's missing today in standards, and to help them. Each one of these other organizations are incredible. They do incredible work, and they're experts, and they have years of experience in this. But sometimes when you're only looking at one aspect of the end-to-end, you miss things. And that's one of the things we'd like the Ultra HD Forum to do. The second thing, as I alluded to, is really about education. What do you mean when you say Ultra HD? What do you mean when you say 4K TV? What's the difference between 4K and 8K? And is there a difference between 4K and UHD1? Actually, they're the same thing. We have multiple names for the same thing. So education becomes very important, because if you don't have a common lexicon, right, you can't communicate. So we want to do that. The second thing we'd like to do after we've done that, as well as feeding, well, actually it's the third thing, because we have feeding information to the SDOs, we have developing a common lexicon, a description, a glossary of terms. The third thing we'd like to do is, because it's a forum, and these different companies each are coming together to help foster the interoperability, is to do interoperability testing to prove the end-to-end systems work with a myriad of different vendors in an environment that's open. And it's such like a plug fest. You plug things into each other and you see if they work, and then when they don't work, you figure out what's missing. Hopefully it's just an implementation thing that would be corrected, but it might be a missing standard that needs to be developed, and then we'll refer that back to the other standards body. Those really are the three big areas that Ericsson would like to see come out of the Ultra HD Forum.
Okay, very valuable it is too. So thanks very much, Matthew, for telling us all about it, and good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Good to see you as well. Thank you.